Chapter 4. The Weight of Interpretation. A feeling, left alone, tends to move the way weather moves. It arrives, shifts, passes. It may be sharp or dull, sudden or slow, but it is rarely permanent in its raw form. Even grief, which can linger for years, does not remain as a single unbroken sensation. It rises and recedes, changes its texture, disappears for stretches, returns with different edges. The body is built for fluctuation. The nervous system is built to metabolize signal. What prolongs feeling is not the feeling itself, it is what gets added to it. A small tightness in the chest appears before a meeting. That tightness could be nothing more than anticipation, the body turning toward something that matters. It could be a simple physical adjustment, a transient spike in arousal. On its own, it might crest and fade within minutes, leaving no story behind. Instead, the mind often treats the sensation as an announcement. It interprets it, it assigns meaning, and the meaning becomes heavier than the sensation that triggered it. The interpretation is rarely poetic, it is usually practical and familiar. Something is wrong. This shouldn't be happening. This means I'm not ready. This is a sign I'm going to perform poorly. This always happens to me. The words can vary, but the movement is consistent. A passing state becomes a verdict. Once the verdict arrives, the body responds as though it has received new information about the world, not merely a momentary change in internal conditions. The feeling then has something to push against. It is no longer moving through open space, it is moving through resistance. This is the hidden mechanism behind emotional amplification. A feeling gains duration and intensity when it is treated as a problem. The mind believes it is being responsible by investigating it, correcting it, preventing it from interfering. But investigation often becomes entanglement. Correction often becomes escalation. Prevention often becomes obsession. The sensation is no longer allowed to be what it is, so it grows into something else, not because it wants to, but because it is being held under a bright light. A feeling that might have lasted 30 seconds can be made to occupy an entire day once it is interpreted as meaningful. This happens in work more than anywhere else because work is saturated with implied consequences. There is always something at stake, even when the stakes are minor. A sentence in an email can be read as competence or incompetence. A pause in a meeting can be read as confidence or weakness. A decision can be read as leadership or recklessness. The mind learns to treat these environments as arenas of evaluation, and evaluation is where interpretation thrives. The body produces a sensation, the mind assigns a meaning, and that meaning immediately reaches outward into imagined social and professional outcomes. The present moment becomes crowded with futures that do not exist yet. A person receives a short reply from a colleague. It is neither warm nor hostile, it is simply brief. In a calm state, it would be processed as normal. In a charged state, it becomes a trigger. The mind supplies context that was never given. They're annoyed. I said something wrong. I'm losing trust. This is going to become a bigger issue. The feeling that follows is not a response to the email, it is a response to the world the mind constructed around the email. The original event is tiny, the interpretation turns it into a landscape. Once a landscape appears, the mind begins navigating it. It starts planning how to repair what may not be broken. It starts rehearsing how to explain what may not need explaining. It begins scanning for signs, collecting evidence, building a case either for safety or for threat. The body stays in an activated state because it is being asked to sustain vigilance. In that state, sensations intensify. The chest tightens further, breath shortens, focus narrows. The mind then reads this intensification as confirmation that the interpretation was correct. The loop closes neatly. The meaning created the feeling, and the feeling becomes proof of the meaning. This is why emotional states can feel so persuasive. They rarely arrive alone. They arrive with a story that makes them feel inevitable. A person does not merely feel anxious, they feel anxious about something that seems real, even when it is speculative. A person does not merely feel irritated, they feel irritated because something seems wrong, even when the wrongness is a projection. The sensation and the meaning merge, and once merged, they are hard to separate without deliberate attention. The merging is not recognized as an act, it is experienced as perception. Interpretation also adds a second, more corrosive layer. It changes the feeling into a commentary on the self. The sensation is no longer just discomfort, it becomes a sign of weakness, of immaturity, of inability to handle pressure. The mind treats the presence of emotion as evidence that something is defective. It begins evaluating the emotional state as though it were a performance. Now the person is not simply anxious, they are anxious about being anxious. They are irritated at themselves for being irritated. They are ashamed of being unsettled. This secondary reaction can be more intense than the original feeling, and it lasts longer because it is maintained by identity. A feeling that could have passed becomes a conflict that must be resolved. This is where people begin to experience emotional states as sticky. They describe being in a mood that won't go away, as though the mood has agency. Often the mood is not staying on its own, it is being held in place by a demand that it leave. The mind is constantly checking whether it has left, and the checking keeps attention tied to it. The mind is constantly negotiating with it, and negotiation keeps it in the room. The feeling becomes the center of the moment because the moment has been organized around trying not to feel it. Work becomes distorted under this weight because work requires attention to something outside the inner atmosphere. It requires contact with the objective. When the mind is interpreting feelings, it is turned inward. It becomes self-referential. It monitors itself, judges itself, anticipates itself. The task becomes background noise, something vaguely present but never fully met. The person feels busy because inner monitoring is activity, but the activity does not produce progress. It produces fatigue. There is a particular kind of tiredness that comes from meaning-making. It is not the tiredness of effort applied outward, it is the tiredness of attention being trapped in a closed loop. A person can spend a day at work while their real labor is occurring inside an invisible chamber, managing internal reactions to imagined implications. They may complete some tasks along the way, but the central experience is one of strain without completion, because interpretation has no finish line. It can always generate another angle, another risk, another possibility that needs to be considered. The mind does not get paid for accuracy. It gets paid, psychologically, for coherence. Coherence is the mind's substitute for control. When something feels uncertain, the mind prefers an explanation, even a harsh one, to the discomfort of not knowing. This is why people often interpret their own feelings in ways that injure them. A wave of low energy becomes "I'm falling behind." A moment of boredom becomes "I chose the wrong path." A day of scattered attention becomes "I'm becoming unreliable." These interpretations are not kind, but they are structured. They give the mind a narrative it can hold, and holding a narrative feels like holding the world. The cost is that the feeling inherits the gravity of the narrative. Interpretation is also contagious across time. A feeling arises, is interpreted, then remembered through the lens of that interpretation. Later, the memory is recalled not as "I felt tense," but as "that meeting was a disaster," even if nothing disastrous happened. The memory becomes evidence in a future argument with the self. The mind begins stacking these memories, building a personal archive that supports the identity being formed. The archive is biased, not out of malice, but out of the mind's tendency to collect what fits the story it already believes. The feeling's natural lifespan ends, but its meaning continues reproducing it. This reproduction is especially powerful in environments where performance is visible and feedback is ambiguous. Many modern workplaces run on implication rather than clarity. A manager's silence can be read a dozen ways. A delayed response can be interpreted as disapproval. A mild question can be taken as criticism. When external signals are unclear, internal interpretation fills the gap. The mind becomes a translator of ambiguity, and translators often project their own mood into the language they claim to decode. A tense person reads threat. A calm person reads neutrality. The email did not change. The weight of interpretation does not only intensify negative states, it can also inflate positive ones into instability. A good day becomes proof that a person has finally figured it out. A successful meeting becomes evidence that they are now a different kind of worker. When the next day arrives with normal friction, the contrast feels like collapse. The mind interprets the shift as failure rather than as fluctuation. Emotional whiplash follows, not because circumstances changed drastically, but because meaning was assigned too aggressively. Interpretation makes mood feel like destiny. This is why people often feel betrayed by their own inconsistency. They think they have lost something when a feeling changes. They believed the feeling was a sign of arrival, a stable platform. When it passes, they conclude that the platform was imaginary, and in a sense, it was. The feeling was never a platform, it was weather. Interpretation built a house on it, then blamed the sky for not holding the roof. The mind's mistake is not that it interprets. Interpretation is part of being human. The mistake is that it forgets it is interpreting. It treats meaning as discovery rather than creation. It assumes the feeling arrived carrying a message, when often the feeling arrived carrying nothing but itself. A sensation does not automatically mean anything. It is the mind that insists it must. The insistence is what makes it heavy. In the most mundane moments, this can be seen in how quickly people narrate their own experience. A person sits down to write and encounters the initial roughness of beginning. Their fingers hesitate over the keyboard, not because the work is impossible, but because entry is always imperfect. The mind labels the hesitation. I'm stuck. I'm not sharp today. I don't have it. The label becomes a tightening. The tightening becomes a confirmation. Soon, the person is no longer facing the draft, they are facing a story about their capability as a writer, assembled in real time from a few seconds of friction. The work did not defeat them, the meaning did. Interpretation also has a moral dimension that people rarely notice. The mind often treats certain feelings as unacceptable. It demands calm, demands confidence, demands steadiness, then punishes the self when those states are not present. The punishment can be subtle: irritation at oneself, impatience, a sense of being behind. That moral pressure turns feeling into failure. Now the body is not only dealing with the original sensation, it is dealing with the implication that the sensation should not exist. The nervous system responds poorly to being told it is wrong for having a nervous system. This is why the pursuit of a permanently right inner state can become its own form of suffering. A person begins treating their emotional life like a control panel that must be tuned before work can proceed. They become a technician of their own interior. They try to eliminate doubt, eliminate resistance, eliminate discomfort. But doubt, resistance, and discomfort are not malfunctions. They are ordinary byproducts of attention encountering something that matters, something uncertain, something demanding. When those byproducts are interpreted as proof that something is off, the person becomes trapped in a continuous cycle of self-correction. They live as though they must earn the right to act. There is a quieter, more accurate way to understand what interpretation does. It converts sensation into obligation. If I feel this, then I must respond to it. If I feel tense, I must calm down. If I feel bored, I must change direction. If I feel uncertain, I must resolve the uncertainty before proceeding. If I feel low, I must wait. The feeling becomes a command, not because feelings are commands, but because meaning has been attached that turns them into commands. The attachment is the mechanism of emotional dependence. This is where the earlier theme of readiness finds its sharpest edge. Readiness often presents itself as respect for feeling. In practice, it is often obedience to interpretation. A person does not merely notice that they feel resistance, they interpret the resistance as a signal that starting would be wrong. They wait, not for the feeling to pass, but for the story to become more comfortable. The moment becomes a negotiation between sensation and meaning. The task is secondary, and so progress becomes secondary. The day becomes a sequence of internal permissions being requested and denied. Interpretation also stretches feelings across space. A person has a difficult call at 10 in the morning, and by afternoon they are still carrying tension, not because the call is still happening, but because the mind has continued telling the story of the call. The story replays, edits itself, adds imagined lines and imagined reactions. The person is not reliving the call, they are living the mind's version of the call in the present moment. The body does not distinguish between the original event and the replay with added meaning. It responds as though the threat or embarrassment is still active. Interpretation becomes time travel with physiological consequences. In this way, meaning assigned to feeling can grant it an artificial lifespan. A brief flush of embarrassment becomes a lingering identity crisis. A small irritation becomes a generalized cynicism. A moment of doubt becomes a wholesale reassessment of a career. The mind does this because it wants to prevent pain by making sense of it, and making sense of it often involves placing it into a larger story. Larger stories feel safer because the mind gives the mind a map, even if the map is drawn in fear. The most damaging interpretations are often the ones that claim to be honest. I'm just being realistic. I know myself. I've seen this pattern. These phrases feel grounded, even humble, but they can be ways of making a temporary state feel permanent. The mind confuses recurrence with inevitability. A person has been anxious before, so anxiety is interpreted as their nature. A person has procrastinated before, so hesitation is interpreted as their character. A person has struggled in the past, so current friction is interpreted as confirmation that struggle is the story of their life. The feeling becomes a witness in a trial that has been running for years. Work becomes heavy under these interpretations because work is one of the few places where meaning has immediate consequences. Interpretation does not stay private. It changes tone, changes pace, changes decisions. A person who interprets their own tension as danger will choose safety. They will avoid certain conversations. They will dilute certain messages. They will postpone decisions that require exposure. They will be less direct, less decisive, less present, not because they are incapable, but because they are managing the meaning they attached to their own internal signals. They are operating as if their feelings are forecasts rather than weather. A quieter example shows the same dynamic. A worker opens a document and feels a dull resistance, a mild sense of not wanting to. That resistance might be nothing more than the inertia of transition, the mind shifting gears. If it is left alone, it often dissolves once the first paragraph is written, once attention sinks into the work. But the mind interprets the resistance as a message about the work's value. This isn't important. This is pointless. This is the wrong thing. The task begins to feel heavier because the mind has injected doubt. The resistance increases, now fed by the story. Soon, the person feels justified in leaving the document because the feeling has grown strong enough to look like evidence. A small sensation becomes a self-fulfilling rationale. Interpretation is not always negative. Sometimes it is grand. A person feels a surge of energy and interprets it as a sign of a new chapter, a turning point, a rebirth. They make promises to themselves. They redesign their identity around the feeling. When the surge passes, as surges do, the collapse is interpreted as betrayal by the self. The person then begins distrusting their own optimism, which becomes another story, another meaning layered over future feelings. They become less willing to be moved by anything because movement has been interpreted as irreliable. The underlying truth is simpler and less dramatic. Feelings arise. They have textures. They influence attention. They can inform and they can distort. But they are not always messages, and they are rarely verdicts. Meaning assigned too quickly makes them heavier than they need to be. It keeps them alive long past their natural span, and it recruits the body into sustaining them. When meaning loosens, something else becomes visible. The body is not as committed to a feeling as the mind is. The body can shift. It can settle. It can return to baseline with surprising speed when it is not being pulled back into the same state by repeated narration. The mind, however, often keeps returning to the feeling as if returning will solve it. It returns because it believes analysis will bring closure. What it usually brings is continuity. Continuity is not always progress. Sometimes it is just persistence. There is a kind of strength in being able to let a feeling be brief, not by suppressing it, not by denying it, but by refusing to assign a meaning that requires a long response. A person can feel tense and still speak clearly. They can feel flat and still execute. They can feel uncertainty and still take a concrete step. In those moments, the feeling remains what it was: weather moving through an occupied day, not a terrain that dictates where the day can go. When interpretation stops inflating sensation into prophecy, the present moment becomes usable again. It becomes specific. It becomes less theatrical. A task returns to its actual size. A conversation returns to the words being said, not the imagined subtext. Work becomes less about managing the self and more about meeting what is in front of the self. The inner world does not disappear, but it stops running the room. And in that quieter room, effort can start to feel like what it actually is: contact applied over time, without requiring the mind to approve the weather before the hand moves.